"You look tired and old," my husband sneered, forbidding me from going to his boss's party. "You'll only embarrass me." For years, I had sacrificed everything for his career, so I called the two numbers he had forbidden me to call for years. I went to the party anyway, and as my husband's jaw hit the floor, his own boss couldn't take his eyes off me. Before we get to the party, I'd love to know, what city are you watching from today? And be sure to subscribe from... There is a photograph that sits on my bedside table. In it, 3 young women are laughing, their arms around each other, standing on a beach with the setting sun behind them. They are vibrant and fearless and full of a life that feels like it belongs to a different person, a different century. One of those women is me. The other 2 are Chloe and Maya, my best friends, my tribe, the sisters I had chosen. The photo was taken 10 years ago. Sometimes it feels like 100. My life now was a very different picture. It was a series of quiet, orderly, and deeply lonely days dedicated to a single, all-consuming purpose: the advancement of my husband's, Gregory's, career. I was the perfect corporate wife. Our home was an immaculate minimalist showcase, always ready for an impromptu visit from one of his clients. Our children were perfectly behaved, their schedules managed with a military precision, and I was the silent, efficient, and increasingly invisible woman who made it all possible. Gregory was a man who was in love with the idea of success, and early in our marriage, he had decided that my friends, my loud, funny, and fiercely independent friends, Chloe and Maya, did not fit into the picture of the life he was trying to build. "They're a bad influence, Isla," he had told me 5 years ago, his voice full of a calm, reasonable tone that was more chilling than any anger. "They're not our kind of people anymore. It's time to grow up." And I, a woman who was still so deeply in love with the man I thought he was, had, to my eternal shame, agreed. I had let the friendships that had been the bedrock of my youth wither and die, a quiet, painful sacrifice on the altar of my husband's ambition. The biggest event of that ambition was upon us. The annual CEO's Gala at his firm was not just a party, it was the battlefield where promotions were won and careers were made. For the past 3 months, our entire lives had revolved around this single night. Gregory was on the shortlist for a major promotion, a vice presidency, and tonight was his final, most important performance. And I was his most important prop. I had spent the entire day preparing. I had arranged for the babysitter. I had laid out his perfectly tailored tuxedo. I had chosen my own dress, a simple, elegant, but 10-year-old black gown that was the only formal thing I still owned. I was tired. The years of putting everyone else's needs before my own, of sleepless nights with sick children, of the constant low-grade stress of managing our perfect lives had taken their toll. There were dark circles under my eyes that no amount of concealer could hide, and a permanent, weary line etched between my brows. He came home from work an hour before we were due to leave, a whirlwind of stressed, arrogant energy. He walked into our bedroom as I was putting on my earrings. He didn't say hello, he just looked at me. His gaze was not the loving gaze of a husband. It was the cold, critical appraisal of a man assessing a piece of company property. He looked at my simple dress, he looked at my tired face, and then he sighed, a sound of pure theatrical exasperation. "Is that what you're wearing?" he asked. "It's the only formal dress I have, Gregory," I said, my voice quiet.
"My God, Isla," he said, shaking his head, a look of profound disgust on his face. "Look at yourself. The dark circles, your hair. You look tired. You look old." He began to pace the room, his own anxiety now a weapon he was aiming directly at me. "The people at this party, they are sharks. They are winners. And you He stopped and looked at me, his eyes full of a cruel, dismissive pity. You look like their prey. You will just embarrass me. You will ruin everything I have worked so hard for. I just stood there, speechless, the cheap silver earrings still in my hand. He then delivered the final, killing blow. You know what? He said, his voice now a cold, final command. Just stay home. You're too ugly. It's better for both of us. He then turned, straightened his own perfect tuxedo in the mirror, and walked out of the room, leaving me alone in the silent, gaping wreckage of my own self-worth. I stood there for a long time, his words echoing in the quiet. And then I looked at myself in the mirror. I looked at the tired woman staring back at me, and he was right. I did look tired. I was tired. I was so, so tired of him. And the sadness, the humiliation, it all began to curdle, to transform into something else, something hot and clean and beautifully, wonderfully liberating. Fury. I walked to the phone, my hands shaking, not with sadness, but with this new, brilliant, and almost forgotten energy. I scrolled through my contacts, past all the important business contacts he had forced me to save, past the numbers for the caterers and the private schools. I scrolled down, 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 until I found them. The two names I had not been allowed to dial in 5 long years. Chloe, Maya. I pressed the call button for Chloe's number, my heart hammering against my ribs. It rang once, twice. Hello? A familiar, warm voice said, a voice I had only heard in my dreams for half a decade. Chloe? I whispered, my own voice a dry, cracked thing. It's Isla. There was a moment of stunned silence on the other end of the line, and then an explosion of sound. Isla! Oh my God, Isla! Where have you been? Are you okay? I'm putting Maya on the line. There was a flurry of muffled shouting, and then Maya's voice, just as loud, just as warm, just as full of a love I thought I had lost forever, came on the line. No way! Isla! Is that really you? And with the sound of their voices, the two voices that had been the soundtrack to my entire life before Gregory, the dam I had so carefully constructed inside me finally completely broke. I collapsed onto the edge of my perfect, minimalist bed, and I told them everything. The words came out in a torrent, a chaotic, ugly, and unstoppable flood of a decade's worth of quiet sacrifices, of 1,000 tiny humiliations culminating in the final, brutal insult of tonight. You're too ugly. Stay home. When I was finished, the line was silent for a moment. But it was not an empty silence. It was a dangerous, simmering silence. That absolute grade A top-tier monster. Okay, don't you move a muscle. Don't you even cry. We're on our way, and we're bringing wine and war paint. Less than an hour later, my silent, sterile house was invaded by the most beautiful, glorious chaos I had ever seen. Chloe and Maya burst through the door, not with pity, but with a righteous, furious energy. They were exactly as I remembered them. Chloe, the sharp, stylish fashion publicist, and Maya, the brilliant bohemian artist. They took one look at my tired face and my sad 10-year-old dress, and they declared a state of emergency.
Right, Chloe said, taking charge as she always did, her eyes scanning my walk-in closet with a professional disdain. Operation Phoenix is a go. First, we burn this entire room to the ground. What followed was a whirlwind of a joy I had forgotten was possible. We sat on the floor of my perfect minimalist living room, drinking a very expensive bottle of champagne they had brought, and for the first time in years, I told the truth. I laughed, I cried, I raged, and they, my beautiful, brilliant, and fiercely loyal friends, they raged with me. They didn't say, "I told you so." They just said, "We've missed you, and we are so, so sorry we let him keep you from us." Then the transformation began. Maya, with her artist's case of makeup brushes, became a magician. "The woman I remember is still under there," she whispered, as she worked, her hands gentle and sure. "We just have to wipe away the dust." Chloe, meanwhile, was on her laptop, a terrifyingly efficient general commanding her troops. "There is a ruby red, off-the-shoulder gown from a new designer that is going to make that entire room of stuffy corporate skeletons weep," she declared. "And thanks to your husband's very generous emergency credit card, it will be here in 1 hour." As they worked, as they fussed, as they draped me in silk and painted my face with color and light, I could feel the ghost of the tired, sad woman I had been just a few hours ago begin to fade. And in her place, a new and yet deeply familiar woman was emerging. The woman from the photograph. The woman who laughed and who was not afraid. When they were finished, they turned me to face the long gilded mirror at the end of my hallway, the one Gregory had bought because it projected success. I looked at my reflection, and for the first time in a decade, I recognized the woman staring back at me. She was not a girl anymore. She was a woman who had been through a war and who had, tonight, finally decided to start fighting back. "There you are," Maya whispered, her own eyes shining. Chloe just grinned, a sharp, dangerous, and beautiful smile. "Gregory wanted to go to his party alone. He is about to get his wish. Now go and burn his entire world to the ground." The taxi ride to the grand hotel where the gala was being held was a journey through a time machine. I watched the city lights blur past the window, but I was not seeing the present. I was seeing the past. I saw the girl I used to be, the one who would go out dancing with Chloe and Maya, the one who was not afraid to take up space in the world. And I saw the woman I had become, a quiet, faded ghost, haunting the edges of her own life. Tonight, those two women were about to finally and violently merge. I walked into the hotel lobby, the cool, conditioned air a stark contrast to the fire in my own veins. The ruby red dress my friends had chosen for me felt less like a piece of clothing and more like a suit of armor. I could feel the stares of the other guests as I walked towards the grand ballroom, and for the first time in a decade, I did not shrink from their gaze. I met it. I held it. I was not a supporting character in someone else's story tonight. I was the lead. I arrived fashionably and deliberately late. I stood for a moment in the grand, arched doorway of the ballroom, surveying the scene. It was a sea of black tuxedos and glittering, expensive gowns. The air was thick with the sound of forced laughter, of networking, of 100 quiet, desperate deals being made. And in the center of it all, holding court, was my husband, Gregory. He was standing with a small, powerful-looking group of men, a glass of champagne in his hand, a look of smug, self-satisfied confidence on his handsome face. He was in his element. And standing right beside him, laughing at one of his jokes, was the king of this particular jungle, his boss, the powerful and notoriously charismatic CEO, Mr. Cole. I took a deep breath, and then I made my entrance. I did not scurry to a dark corner. I did not search for a friendly face. I simply began to walk, my steps slow, deliberate, and sure, a path opening up in the crowd as I moved. A quiet but noticeable hush began to fall over the room. Conversations faltered, heads turned. A low, curious murmur rippled through the crowd. Who is that? I was a mystery, a splash of brilliant, confident red in a sea of muted corporate colors. I was not Gregory's tired, plain wife. I was a stranger. I watched as my husband, Gregory, noticed the shift in the room's energy. I saw him turn his head, an annoyed, impatient look on his face, clearly irritated that someone else was stealing his spotlight. His eyes scanned the crowd, and then they landed on me. The reaction was a thing of pure, exquisite, and deeply satisfying beauty. I watched it happen in slow motion. First, his eyes widened with a look of simple animal appreciation for a beautiful, unknown woman. Then, a flicker of confused recognition, a glitch in the matrix of his arrogant mind, as his brain tried to place the familiar shape of my face. And finally, the dawning, catastrophic, and jaw-dropping realization that this stunning, radiant, and dangerously confident woman was in fact his own wife. The wife he had, just 2 hours ago, called ugly and had forbidden from attending. His jaw, quite literally, dropped. The champagne flute in his hand tilted, a small, unnoticed stream of expensive champagne spilling onto the pristine white carpet. His face, which had been so full of a smug, self-satisfied pride, was now a pale, slack-jawed mask of pure, abject, and soul-shattering shock. He just stood there, frozen, a statue of his own ruin, as the entire room now turned to look at what had so completely and totally captured his attention. But it was not his reaction that mattered most. It was the reaction of the man beside him.
Mr. Cole, the CEO, the man whose approval my husband had been so desperate to win, had also turned. He looked at me, and his own eyes, which were sharp, intelligent, and famously missed nothing, widened with a look of genuine, appreciative surprise. He looked at my husband's stunned, idiotic expression, and then he looked back at me, a slow, deeply amused, and intensely curious smile spreading across his own handsome face. My husband just stood there, paralyzed by his own shock, unable to move, unable to speak. He had forbidden me from coming. He had cast me aside. He had left me for dead. But his boss, the one man in the entire world he was so desperate to impress, was now excusing himself from Gregory's little circle. He was straightening his tie, and he was beginning to walk with a slow, deliberate, and undeniable purpose directly across the ballroom floor, his eyes fixed, with an expression of intense and deeply appreciative curiosity, on me. The party was just beginning, and my husband was no longer the guest of honor. Mr. Cole stopped in front of me. He was older than me, perhaps in his late 40s, but he had a timeless, charismatic energy, and his eyes, a sharp, intelligent shade of blue, were full of a genuine and deeply amused curiosity. "I don't believe we've had the pleasure," he said, his voice a low, confident baritone. "I'm Alexander Cole, and you," he said, his gaze doing a quick, appreciative, but respectful sweep of my ruby-red dress, "are the most stunning woman in this room. I would have certainly remembered if we had met." "Isla," I said, my own voice a calm, steady instrument that I barely recognized. I extended my hand. "Isla Vance." I used my maiden name, a small but significant act of rebellion. "Well, Isla Vance," he said, taking my hand, his grip warm and firm. "It is a profound pleasure, but you have put me in a difficult position." "Oh," I asked, my eyebrows arching in a question. "Yes," he said, his eyes twinkling. "You see, you have just, in the space of 30 seconds, completely disproven a theory I have held for many years, that my senior vice president of acquisitions, Gregory," he gave a small, almost imperceptible nod in the direction of my still-frozen husband, "had at least a modicum of good sense. Clearly, I was mistaken." I let out a small, genuine laugh, a sound I hadn't made in a long time. It felt good. "Tell me, Isla," he continued, his voice a low, conspiratorial murmur as he expertly guided me away from the prying ears of the other guests towards a quieter corner of the ballroom. "What is a woman like you doing with a man like him?" And so I told him. Not the whole ugly and deeply personal story of our marriage, but a polished, witty, and devastatingly charming version of it. I spoke of a husband who was a brilliant but deeply insecure man, a man so obsessed with the appearance of success that he sometimes forgot the value of the people who were actually supporting him. I painted a picture not of a victim, but of a woman who was tired of being underestimated. And he, Mr. Cole, the most powerful man in my husband's world, he listened. He listened with an intensity, with a genuine, intelligent engagement that I had not felt from my own husband in years. We talked about art, about travel, about books. He was a man who was not just successful, but interesting. And for the first time in a long time, I felt like I was too. I was vaguely aware of Gregory, my husband, watching us from across the room, his face a thunderous mask of pure, jealous rage. He would try to approach to reclaim his territory, but Mr. Cole, with a master's skill, would just turn his back slightly, a subtle but absolute gesture of dismissal, and continue our conversation, leaving my husband a frustrated, impotent ghost on the periphery of our new and far more interesting world. The ultimate and most beautiful blow came at the end of the evening, during the charity auction. Mr. Cole, who was acting as the auctioneer, was on stage, selling off a series of extravagant prizes. And then he paused. "And now, for our final and most special item of the evening," he announced, his voice booming through the ballroom. "An impromptu and very generous donation." He looked out into the crowd, and his eyes found mine. "I have just spent the last hour in a fascinating conversation with the most intelligent and insightful woman I have met in a very long time, and I have discovered that she has a passion for classic literature. It is my great pleasure to announce that I will be personally funding a new, state-of-the-art children's library for the city's main hospital, a project that will be designed and curated, if she will accept the position, by Ms. Isla Vance." The room erupted in applause. It was a stunning, public, and incredibly generous gesture. It was also a masterstroke of corporate and social warfare. My husband, Gregory, who had been trying to win this man's approval all night, had just been forced to watch as his boss publicly offered his ugly, embarrassing wife a prestigious and very powerful new role. Mr. Cole then looked directly at Gregory, a cold, hard, and deeply challenging smile on his face. "And I trust," he said, his voice a clear, public command, "that her husband, our own Gregory, a man we are considering for a major promotion, will be the kind of supportive, modern partner who will encourage his brilliant wife to take on this important new work. Won't you, Gregory?" My husband just stood there, trapped in the brilliant, blinding glare of the spotlight, 100 pairs of eyes on him. He could do nothing. He could say nothing. He just nodded, a small, jerky, and utterly defeated movement. I had come to this party a ghost, an embarrassment, a wife to be hidden away. I was now leaving as the head of a major philanthropic project, a woman publicly celebrated for her intelligence by the one and only man whose opinion mattered most in this entire, glittering, and deeply shallow world. And my husband, the man who had tried to silence me, had just been forced to publicly applaud my success. The rest of the gala passed in a dreamlike, victorious haze. I was no longer an outsider. I was the center of a new, powerful gravity. People who had looked straight through me just an hour before were now flocking to my side, eager to congratulate me on my new project and to be seen with the woman who had so clearly captured the CEO's attention. I handled them with a grace and a confidence I didn't know I possessed. The ghost of the old, fearless Isla finally and fully resurrected. My husband, Gregory, spent the remainder of the evening on the periphery, a sullen, resentful shadow, forced to watch as I charmed his colleagues, his rivals, and, most importantly, his boss. He was a king who had been dethroned in his own court by the one person he had never even considered a player in the game. The drive home was a masterpiece of cold, silent fury. He did not speak. He just gripped the steering wheel of his expensive sports car, his knuckles white, his jaw clenched so tight I thought his teeth might crack. When we finally walked into our silent, immaculate, and now deeply oppressive apartment, the dam of his rage finally broke. "What was that?" he hissed, his voice a low, venomous thing, as he threw his car keys onto the glass coffee table. "What in the hell do you think you were doing, Isla? Flirting with my boss? Making a spectacle of yourself? You were trying to humiliate me, weren't you?" I just looked at him, at this stranger, this small, insecure man who was so terrified of his own shadow. The fear I had once felt for him, the desperate need for his approval, was gone. All I felt was a profound and deeply liberating sense of pity. "No, Gregory," I said, my voice quiet, calm, and utterly devoid of the emotion he was so desperately trying to provoke. "I wasn't trying to humiliate you. You did a perfectly good job of that all by yourself." I walked to our bedroom and began to pack a small overnight bag. "You know," I said, my back to him as I folded my clothes, "the funniest part of all of this is that you were right. This afternoon, you looked at me and you told me I was tired and old and ugly, and you were right. I was. I was tired of living in your shadow. I was tired of making myself small to make you feel big. I was tired of this cold, perfect, and empty life you have built for us." I turned to face him, the small bag in my hand. "But I'm not tired anymore." I walked to the dresser and slid the simple, elegant diamond wedding band from my finger. It felt surprisingly light. I placed it on the polished wood of his dresser next to his expensive watch and his monogrammed cufflinks. I think the woman I was tonight, the one who can laugh and who can talk to interesting people and who can build a library for sick children, I think she deserves someone who sees her, someone who is not embarrassed by her but proud of her. I looked him in the eye one last time, and that man is not you, Gregory. It never was. I walked out of our bedroom, out of our perfect minimalist apartment, and out of the cold, loveless marriage I had just, finally, and blessedly escaped. I did not know where I was going, but for the first time in a very long time, I knew who I was, and I was not ugly. I was free. The story ends not with a dramatic courtroom battle, but with a quiet and deeply satisfying beginning. It's a year later. I am standing in the newly opened I Love Vance Children's Library at the City Hospital, the air filled with the scent of new books and the happy, quiet murmur of children reading. The project, under Mr. Cole's generous patronage, has been a resounding success, and so have I. My divorce from Gregory was a quiet, simple affair. His fear of his boss's disapproval was greater than his desire to fight me. He is still a vice president at his firm, but he is a smaller man now, a man whose arrogance has been permanently tempered by a single night of public humiliation. I am not the same woman I was. I am no longer a corporate wife. I am a philanthropist, a leader, a woman with a purpose. And I am not alone. The two women from the photograph, my two beautiful, brilliant, and fiercely loyal friends, are standing beside me, their arms linked through mine. We are a tribe again. I look around at the beautiful, vibrant space I have created, at the children whose lives I am helping to change, and I think about my ex-husband's final, cruel words to me. He had told me I was too ugly to be seen with him, and he was right. My old life with him had been a cage that was far too small and far too ugly for the woman I was always meant to be. An absolutely powerful story of a woman reclaiming her own worth in the most public way possible. What a perfect and classy revenge. What do you think of the way Mr. Cole, the boss, handled the situation at the party? Let us know in the comments below. If you were cheering for Isla's amazing transformation, please show your support by hitting that like button. And be sure to subscribe for more incredible stories of vindication. Don't forget to click the notification bell so you never miss an upload. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.